Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Friday Society podcast. I'm here today with Laura Lee Bryant. You probably know her on Instagram as Laura Lee Balanced. I've been following her for a very, very long time. You're a three-time author now, right? As of this upcoming spring.
Yes, that's right. It's crazy.
So exciting. And I just have an amazing Instagram account, an amazing business. So I'm super excited to hear from you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This is really fun.
I'm so excited. I was telling you earlier, obviously, before we started recording, but I've just been following you for a really long time. I don't even remember how I found you, but when I started getting into just healthier eating and like wellness recipes and things, I had found your account. And then we had both gone through a breakup at like the exact same time. Like there was something that you had posted and it was the same week that I was breaking up with someone. And I was just like, wow, okay. And then you started talking about it a bit more and how it pertains to wellness. So I'm very excited to get into like just this conversation with you around healing and food and the interconnection between both of them. So I'm super excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I mean, thank you for having me because honestly, this topic is still so new and I haven't had a lot of opportunities to go into a lot of these different things and the changes in my business and what I'm really passionate about. So I am pumped.
Yeah. And I feel like it's definitely just because of the world that we're in, right? Like the wellness world on Instagram is super specific, but I've definitely noticed such a rise in the conversation around your nervous system and balancing that and rest and digest and, the role that emotions play in our eating. So it feels timely for me that we're having this conversation. So I'm excited.
Totally. Totally.
So, okay, before we get started though, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? If people don't know you, where are you? What has your career journey sort of been? And what was your gateway drug into wellness and nutrition?
I love that. Okay, so my sort of title is certified holistic chef, and I feel like I know less and less what that means as time goes on, but I graduated from a school called the Natural Gourmet Institute in 2013 or 13. And I was living in New York City at the time. And I had a really hard 5 years in the city. It was like 5 years too long, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I had gone into living in New York thinking I was going to be a lawyer. Very quickly realized I didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
And then very quickly was super I probably depressed looking back at it, but definitely very anxious. I think anxiety and depression, they show up in similar ways sometimes. And I know for me, anxiety is how things kind of manifest, no matter really what I'm experiencing. And it took about 4 of those 5 years for me to have any idea what I wanted to shift into. And I had started going to bookstores when I was really bored at work. There was just really not much going on. I was a paralegal. And I found this woman named Kimberly Snyder. Are you familiar with her?
Yeah.
Thank you, because no one has ever heard of her anymore.
Yeah.
And
She was like my gateway drug into all that. I found her Instagram account when I was like young, like it was a while ago, like when Instagram first started. And yeah, I've been following her ever since.
oh my gosh. Okay. I truly think you're the first person who's also known her that I have brought her up with. And she's amazing. She really was one of the pioneers in the wellness space. And she was one of the first people talking about the mind-body connection more than just how you physically look. She was really talking about the inside. And I thought it was fascinating. And so I just finally decided to stop doing what I had been doing, which is using all the Band-Aids and numbing devices. And I stopped partying. I started just wandering around New York with a backpack on, going to the farmers markets and started cooking for myself. And all of these changes had such a positive impact on my mental health and my anxiety. And I really fell in love with food, kind of the same way you did. It sounds like through finding this tiny wellness world. That's what it was at the time, this budding world and thinking like people need to know about this.
Yeah.
And so I went to culinary school, and it was one of the best years of my life to date. It was just such an amazing experience. And I knew I wanted to come back to Nashville now that I had some purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved back and started my business in the summer of 2013.
Wow.
And truly the only through line I've had for the last 10 years has been recipe creation, photography, if you can call it that. I look back at even my pictures from last year. I mean, it's just, it really does have such a learning curve, but really that was my only consistent through line was making recipes and sharing them. Everything else has changed over time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think foundationally, there are certain wellness tenets that I, stick to.
Mm-hmm.
But for the most part, a lot of it has shifted. And that to me that's been hard in certain ways, but also really empowering in other
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Mm-hmm. It's funny too, because so 2013, that was the year that I started working and like had graduated college and all that. And to paint the picture for you guys, like I'm sure everybody remembers, but that was the time of like blueprint juice cleanses and like it feels so crazy because I actually like I haven't reflected on that until right now in this moment, but like the mind body connection of food really wasn't a conversation yet. Like it really wasn't. And it's interesting that you're bringing that up because yeah, I don't think we just hadn't talked about it. Like it was the blueprint era of like everything you put in your mouth is going to be how you look. Like there was no conversation around like your anxiety will feel different. You will feel more grounded. Like there was no conversation around, like the weather inside.
Mm-hmm. Hormone health, anything like that. It was so interesting. I had this weird rash that developed on my face while I was in culinary school. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to use all my, holistic food knowledge to fix this. And I eliminated everything, quote, bad. By the way, I say that like very tongue in cheek. There really is. There's very few things in the food world that are blanket statements, but and I was just eliminating everything. I was doing a bunch of the juice cleanses. Like I was like, I'm doing everything perfectly. And it just got worse and worse. And then finally, I went to a doctor in Nashville, a dermatologist, and she said, you have what I would call angry skin. And she was like, you're just doing too much. You're way too focused on it. You need to like stop with like all the natural stuff that you're doing and chill out. And she gave me CeraVe or Cetaphil, one of those, you can buy. Within days, it had cleared up, and I just took an exhale and stopped. I mean, that was probably the first of many times where I slowly let go of the perfection that doesn't exist when it comes to anything, and definitely healthy eating. And it was such a good example of the fact that it was my stress that was causing it. And frankly, with every passing day, I truly believe, barring, some specific health conditions, diseases, that kind of thing that are they're all very real. I do believe that, and they need to be treated physically, they need to be treated first, and then you can kind of work inside. I really think that the biggest missing piece is understanding that you can eat the most perfectly healthy diet in the world, whatever that means to you. But if your mental health and if your anxiety is tough, if you have stressful circumstances that you're not navigating and working on, it's really only going to make so much of a difference.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, okay. So in 2013, when did you realize, like, what did you want this company to sort of look like? Where did you start with recipe creation and photography? Like, what did the early days look like of creating your business?
Yeah, truthfully, I really didn't know. The only thing I knew was that I wanted to share recipes. I had worked at 2 restaurants in the city, and I knew I didn't want to work in restaurants from that experience. I mean, I learned a ton, but it was not the world for me.
Yeah.
An environment that has shifted a lot as people in the restaurant world are realizing how much they really need to take care of the mental and physical health of their employees in order for people to stay healthy, because there is so much, drug abuse in that world.
Right.
And so
Right.
I knew that wasn't for me. And really, other than that, it was truly like the spaghetti tactic of throwing everything against the wall. I mean, what I did was I went to local juice bars and gyms around Nashville and, cafes. And I said, can I teach a class for free? And so I just taught
Wow.
classes for free. I worked at a cafe for free. I mean, not for free. I worked at a cafe so that I could do things for free. And
Yeah.
it was truly word of mouth. And it
Wow.
just took years of doing that. And some people, I just said yes to everything. If someone said, I want a private cooking class, I was like, sure, I do that. You want catering for 30 people? Sure, I do that. I just did it
Wow.
all. And really it, over time, I built up a little community and there was a lot of support. People started to pay me for these services a little bit more. I realized what I really didn't like to do. And then I kind of stumbled into my first cookbook deal, I think 3 years into my business through a mutual friend introducing me. And that was when things really shifted.
Wow. I love hearing that you just went around and just offered to teach cooking classes. I think that's organic marketing and grassroots marketing is like my favorite thing, and through partnerships and like real relationship building. And I can't imagine like who you got to meet and just the ways that you got to truly connect with people in the early days. Like that must be something that you look back at as just really moving the needle for you in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Thank you. Absolutely. I really cherished that time. And it's why I still teach in-person cooking classes
Awesome.
relatively regularly, even though it's not like the best, like for my business per se.
Yeah.
But I just love being around people and I can't give that up. So
Yeah.
uh,
I love it. I mean, I saw that on your website earlier. What goes like, how often are you still teaching them? I saw that they're 3 hours, which is amazing.
mhm.
What do those 3 hours look like?
Yeah. So so my classes, they've changed over time as well. Now that I want to talk about some of these bigger topics. So
Yeah.
we've extended the classes. It used to be 2.5 hours. Now it's about
Okay.
3. And the classes are anywhere from around 7 people. I've taught classes up to 14 people. I really tried not to make them that big just so that there can be more individual attention if people have questions. They're demonstration style. So you come and you hang out and you watch me and you chill. And to be honest, even though there have been times where I've wanted to be able to offer hands-on classes, I really do think people learn more when they're watching rather than when they're just like focused on making sure they do their one thing right.
Yeah.
But the classes, I only teach about one per month, and I only do it for about 4 months out of the year. And that's because I put probably, I mean, basically a full week of work goes into one class because I
Hmm.
like to offer a lot of recipes. I do, just between multiple grocery trips, a full day of prep, set
Yeah.
up all of that. So that's my choice, is like, I try to make it
Yeah.
this, I want it to be this big thing, this big event that feels really special. And I really want people to be taken care of.
Hmm.
So, they are work. I am starting to offer classes in people's homes, which is not something I've done historically,
That's
but for a
awesome.
couple of reasons, but I'm going to start doing that more, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, that's super fun. And just like what a great way to meet people where they're comfortable and, just already sort of at ease. So I love that.
Yeah. Thank
Now,
you.
your first book, tell us a little bit about your first two books, and then I want to get into the third one that's coming out this spring. So, what were the first two?
Yeah. So the first book was the Laura Lee Balance Cookbook, and it still feels, like a firstborn child. I mean, it really, books are amazing. They school you. I mean, they just wipe you out, and they're so humbling. It's such a humbling
Yeah.
experience every time. And the first two were really focused on kind of the kind of the first half of my business. The way I think about it
Mhm.
was where I was really focused on um, substitutions for people with dietary preferences, using a lot of specialty ingredients that can be found at, places like Whole Foods. But,
Mhm.
just kind of healthy comfort food is the theme, really the theme through all of my books.
Mhm.
But I was in a place where I was totally comfortable, using almond flour and chia seeds and nutritional yeast all the time. These things they were always expensive, but when the pandemic hit,
Mm.
I realized just how expensive my recipes were, and also that they
Mhm.
were pretty time consuming. Some are quick, but a lot of them like are pretty time consuming. And
Yeah.
so I love my first two books, and they are great options for people who do need everything to be gluten-free, dairy-free, a lot of vegan
Mhm.
options, really like the highest quality. I mean, I love my books. I'm really proud of them, but so much changed for me in 2020, professionally and personally. And I just needed to change my business with that.
Yeah. What what's what was the moment sort of that you had, like, because it sounds like you had a little bit of like an aha moment of like, all right, this the way I've been doing things, maybe it's not the most accessible. Like, what did that look like for you? Because that's sort of, I mean, that's like an ego death, right? It's like it's an intense moment to look at your business and be like, uh-oh, I think I might need to pivot here. Like, what did that look like for you?
Mhm. Yeah, I've had a lot of ego deaths in my business. And, speaking of humbling experiences, I mean, I got divorced 5 years ago. And before, when I was married, I had the flexibility to spend most of my days not worrying about making money, but just making tons of recipes and being on my
Mm,
stories all the time. And then for the last 5 years, I have been financially responsible for myself. And so, I've had to practice being creative and pivoting and starting business ventures and letting them fail, choosing for them to
mm,
fail, some of them failing on their own, and then having to pick myself up and do that all in front of my community, which is not easy to do,
right.
but it has been the reality of my life, being on my own. And I've had relationships, but have been, on my own in that way. And that's been hard, but it's also, I mean, man, there is nothing also like putting out a book to just like to get a thick skin and going through a
Yeah.
divorce and having any kind of public platform, even a small public platform like mine, to really just practice like being okay with whatever stories people make up about you. Um,
Yeah.
so I wouldn't say there was like one moment specifically, but I do think it was an accumulation of going through divorce. And that was a really tough time. And then jumping into another relationship that was not the right fit for me very quickly. And then moving in with him very quickly and having all of that be public. And then the pandemic hit, and all of a sudden it was the first time where I lost
Mm,
my streams of income, and everything
mhm,
changed with that. And just all of that, in that spring, like for so many of us, everything came crumbling down. And that
mhm.
was the first time where I had the opportunity to stop and ask myself, like, what do I want this to look like when I rebuild?
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Like, what do you want to rebuild it into instead of just like the rinse and repeat of what you were doing before? Yeah. Wow. That's awesome. So, okay. So this third book is coming out. When exactly?
So July, this
Okay.
coming time.
Amazing. And that is called Recipes for an Aching Heart, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. So I assume this was born from this moment where you were breaking up with this person. Can you tell us a little bit about the backstory? When did you realize there was a direct relationship with the food you were eating and the grief that you were going through?
hmm Yeah. So the first thing when everything changed in 2020, the first thing I did this meal plan community. I started this meal plan community for a year that was just sharing
Nice.
meal plans, and they were really inexpensive. And so I could tell they were serving my community in a certain way. But when I went through this breakup, all of a sudden I had no appetite, no energy. And
Mm,
even the meal plans, which were definitely more simple than my recipes up until then, I was just like, I am just not feeling this and
mm,
want any of it. And so that was the first time where I really started to customize my food experience to the grief that I was going through,
mhm.
and really wasn't really doing any research on it at the time, but I really was just creating recipes that soothed my digestive system, my nervous system. And I
Yeah.
adjusted that as I went through the stages of grief. And it was kind of abstract at the time. And then a couple months later, 4 or 5 months later, when I was really feeling good again, I thought, maybe I should put some of those recipes in an ebook. And so I created an ebook called Recipes for a Broken Heart. And at the time, I was actually supposed to be writing my third cookbook about meal plans. And I called my publisher and I said, I'm like kind of over the meal plan thing. Can I change to this topic of healing broken hearts? And he's super cool. And he was like down for it. So I shifted everything. And that was when I really started doing a lot of research about grief and healing and the science behind it. And I realized I became more and more passionate about sharing what I'd gone through, because there is this concept called disenfranchised grief, which is grief that really isn't recognized by society the way that traditional loss of an immediate family member is, or something like tragic like that.
Wow.
And it's things like miscarriage, like romantic loss, like job loss, pet loss. And I wanted to create a space for this disenfranchised heartache. And I started calling it heartache instead of heartbreak, because I want to get away from this notion that there's something broken about you. Because there's not, we're hurting, but we can mend, and there's nothing broken. And so I just really took it from there and decided this past summer, as I was wrapping up writing the book, that I wanted to shift my business to this completely and help other women specifically who were going through what I had gone through. Especially, I tend to attract women who have an anxious attachment style, learned a lot about attachment style. And that was a game changer for me, learning that information. And so I did a ton of research on these different theories behind grief and put together one that I thought made the most sense. And basically spent this past summer investing in my business and redoing it to have this focus.
Wow. Now I want to go into a little further when you said that you realized there was certain food that wasn't soothing you, because I think that's such an enlightened, and I'm not even sure, like, I want to just sort of shine a light on how enlightened that really is, because I think, you've been in food for a really long time. And so you've been able to observe the way food makes you feel and the way it makes you feel emotionally, which is such an interesting thing, because I think a lot of people are just moving through their day, hustling, eating whatever. Like, what does that look like? And what sort of recommendations do you have for people to observe if food is soothing to their nervous system or not? Like, what does that look like for somebody who maybe is just thinking about the way, food impacts their nervous system for the first time? Like, where would you sort of recommend that they start?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I think this is where the amounts that the wellness world has grown can kind of shoot us in the foot, because we're so inundated with information that we really have this idea of what's right and wrong, good and bad, on the wagon, off the wagon. And really, it is as simple, first and foremost, as tuning out the noise and just checking in with your body, because most of the time you will very quickly be like, something's not happy here. Usually that will show up in things like I would say digestive is probably the biggest. You will be experiencing cramping, bloating, constipation, diarrhea, anything on that spectrum. That's one thing. And other stress symptoms would be things like, extreme cravings for salty or sweet food, fried foods. Typically what I notice with grief, what I've seen, and this really matches the physiological response that we have to like the traditional Elizabeth Kubler-Ross 5 stages of grief. And then there's a woman named Helen Fisher, PhD, who talks about protest and resignation, these 2 phases of romantic heartbreak. The first that most people experience, which is similar to a lot of trauma responses. And I just want to give a caveat. I'm not a professional when it comes to trauma. I always have my clients work with therapists. This is simply from what I've researched and from my own experience and my experience with clients. But usually when it's a pretty severe breakup or divorce, split, it's a lack of appetite initially. Very little. Food is disgusting. And in that initial stage, what we don't want to do is barrel through and try to consume a lot of things that we think are, quote, healthy, because the wellness world tells us they're healthy, when actually it's important to remember in that state, you're in fight or flight. Your body thinks that something really bad, I mean, it is something really bad is happening. And so a lot of your energy, your blood flow is getting diverted to this very frenetic place of feeling like you have to defend yourself, to your muscles, to your brain, to pumping blood. And so that is getting diverted away from your digestive system. So your digestive system doesn't have the capacity to digest things like, for a lot of people, you know, a kale salad, probably not going to be your best friend. Raw veggies, like things that we think of as like, quote, you know, sort of universally healthy, probably not going to sit with you. Wouldn't recommend them to people. Spicy foods, really acidic foods initially, probably not going to be the best fit. You know, really high fiber foods in general, like beans, may not sit with you during that time. This is a time with my clients where I really recommend nourishing them with a lot of nutrient dense liquids. This is a great time to do things like a great quality bone broth that you can like mix some scrambled eggs into, and coconut water, which is going to replenish some electrolytes if you are probably A, not hydrating, and B, crying a ton, sweating, because we sweat when we're anxious. Think of it as this really worked up, like brain on fire state. And, you know, tea, kombucha, I mean, even kombucha sometimes can be hard on the digestive system, but nutrient dense smoothies are a great option during this time, depending how you digest dairy, yogurt with protein powder and like some flax seeds, oatmeal, applesauce with some hemp seeds in it, you know, just little places you can get fat and protein. So that's that initial stage. And I mean, even just like a sourdough with bread and butter, you know, sourdough bread with butter and salt. You also may notice that you may have been someone who has a sweet tooth, like a raging sweet tooth normally, and all of a sudden you really don't want anything sweet. You want savory. Listen to that stuff. There's actually science that, you know, the elevated salt levels, again, a caveat, this is not to go out and eat a bunch of processed food. This is like teeny tiny bit of added salt that you sprinkle on top can potentially be helpful in reducing stress levels. So thinking about things like that, then typically what I see is that it then kind of melds. Once you are out of that acute phase, your appetite starts to come back, but it comes back with a vengeance for things that are going to give you those hits of dopamine and serotonin that you now no longer have from your partner. And so that's where we get into like the intense sugar cravings, the fried food, the salty, crunchy. And to me, that's where I like to have people really focus on protein and adding some fiber back in. Let's get you feeling more full, which is going to help with some of those cravings, but also coming up with healthier alternatives to those cravings. And
wow. It's so interesting because I see such a correlation with almost like what that dermatologist sort of said to you of like, just give space for a second, like just breathe and just see how you feel. And you hear so much of like, okay, well, you should do this and you should do that and whatever. And it's like, what you're actually saying is just do less, like just do a little bit less and just give yourself some time and just really check in with yourself and like not at all what everybody else is sort of telling you to do, which I think is so empowering. And it is so important to just keep sharing that message because there's so much that's like thrown at people of all the different things you need to be doing and all the things you need to be eating and all the workouts you need to do and your cycle syncing and blah, blah. Like there's just so much that I think just giving people that permission to pause and check themselves is just so incredibly important.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Because I mean, when we lose someone who was our primary attachment figure as an adult, that is so incredibly difficult on every part of your body. I mean, time is different when you're freshly out of something. Like time is slower. And I mean, time is relative, right? We all are on the same clock. And yet it is true that time flies when you're having fun. And when you are in that kind of pain, I mean, it is 1 hour at a time, 1 minute at a time. And so it's like, we have got, if society and culture won't honor that for us, we have to honor that for ourselves and be like, no, I am precious and fragile, and I deserve to treat this space that I'm in different than the world that's flashing by me, you know? And really, I mean, one of the first things I have people do is create these must lists if they have like just come out of a breakup. And it's a list of what you absolutely have to do in order to keep your life running. and that are
Wow.
non-negotiable. And then everything else off the calendar. It's
Mm-hmm.
your time and you deserve
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah.
And all of these things, I think we really need to be honoring more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, okay, so we talked a little bit about those first two phases, right? And then the second phase, sort of incorporating a little bit more fullness, a little more about that. Can you speak a little bit more on the nervous system regulation aspect of things? Because I want to like sort of just double click on that of like, where your blood flow is even going is super important. So like what effect does grief have on our nervous system? And what other things can you be doing maybe to like nourish and allow your nervous system to sort of like come back down?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, so grief and stress have all kinds of impacts on the nervous system, and a lot of it depends on how prolonged it is. A lot of it will depend on your attachment style and how strongly you respond to rejection and abandonment. For some people, that really is a core wound, and so you may have a bigger nervous system response if you're someone who really is experiencing loss as abandonment and rejection.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the biggest things when it comes to food is realizing how much of an impact that's going to have on your blood sugar. So blood sugar is one at where, I mean, we have these, cortisol is going through the roof. And if that stays elevated, that can change your insulin resistance. And so it's really, really important to find healthier alternatives. Now, I say this, it's important sometimes to just have the thing that you want, right? Like if
Yeah.
it's Dairy Queen Blizzard and you just need it, like have the Blizzard. The big picture, right? Let's try to keep your blood sugar relatively stable with protein, fat, and fiber so that you're not contributing to that spike. And it's also really hard because a lot of the time when you don't have an appetite, you go long periods of time and then you're so hungry, you want the first thing, which is usually going to be a carbohydrate. But as much as possible, we don't want to eat when we're really, really not hungry, like too much, we do want to listen to that, but we also do need to make sure that we're nourishing ourselves and preventing those blood sugar spikes. That's really, really going to help keeping things stable. I would say this is the time to minimize, if not eliminate caffeine, minimize, if not eliminate alcohol. And really look for, some alternatives to the things that you're craving. And also with the nervous system, I mean, oh my gosh, things like your exercise and movement, that's a big piece of it. If you are
I was
someone,
going to ask about that one with when you have elevated cortisol and people, it's like you see people sort of just want to push through, right? And a lot of the times pushing through is like, oh, I'm just going to go for a run or I'm going to go to that class. And it's like when you do start to learn a little bit more about your cortisol and things, you're just like, no, it's the worst thing you can do. Like, don't do that.
oh my gosh. And especially as a woman too, I mean, we are more delicate in a really beautiful way. I mean, we don't have that same, and we're also, we can't necessarily consistently do the same things, even when we're healthy, depending on the time of the month. But movement, definitely take a look at what you've been doing. And if you've been doing things that are really high intensity, I would just invite something probably a little bit slower that isn't, because all exercise is a form of stress. I mean, it's all stress.
Right.
So I would really recommend looking into, in those first few phases, especially looking into things like yoga, Pilates, especially yin yoga, walking, hiking, being out in nature, light exposure. And then later on, when we are experiencing a very healthy amount of anger and you're feeling energized, you're eating well, that could definitely be the time to take the kickboxing and punch a bag and, but really considering slowing down and not adding to that stress and doing things that are a bit more supportive. And you're also like, you're burning energy on all of this. Like your brain is trying to make sense of something that in some ways is, I'm not going to say it's more difficult, but is difficult for some people equally as a traditional loss, because this person is essentially dead to you, but they exist. I mean, think about how hard that is for a brain to compute,
Yeah.
especially if someone's down the street from you,
Right.
I mean, I was neighbors with an ex of mine, and
Wow.
that was really
Oh,
hard, and so it's just like your brain is like working in overdrive to try
yeah.
to put some kind of sense to what has happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, all of that is, all of that are things that our nervous system, like where our nervous system really needs us.
Hmm. let's go into the alcohol thing a little bit more because I over the summer, and this was also, when the Andrew Huberman podcast came out about alcohol, like I sort of like to say, like, I can't unsee all data recently. Like that's sort of like I've cut down a bunch on drinking. I have a glass of wine, maybe, I don't know, once a quarter now, but like I just can't really go further than that. But it started because when I was going through a breakup, I realized that on the days that I had a drink around that time, or like on the weeks that I was, going out with friends or whatever, I was way more depressed about the relationship than I was on the days that I wasn't drinking. And I'm curious if you've gone into that a little bit of, maybe a little bit of the research of like anxiety, and like that is a real thing, and sort of the effect that alcohol has on our nervous systems and our healing, and the way that our brain is sort of processing all this information.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, alcohol is a tricky subject because I think that, I mean, yes, we all know that there are studies that support like very moderate amounts of alcohol. And then there's also a lot of science that you should never drink alcohol and it's a toxic, whatever. But I think what's most important is for people to be really realistic with themselves. What I don't want is to shame someone who's used to having, especially if they were at the end of a really difficult relationship, maybe they were drinking close to a bottle of wine every night or something that like, it's not ideal,
Yeah.
but to sort of say, okay, now that you're going through this breakup, you need to fundamentally change this major crutch that you've had.
Right.
That's not fair or realistic for people, but it is like, okay, now that you are in this more fragile state, could we reduce the 3 glasses of wine to maybe like a glass of wine and just kind of hedge that and, take into consideration, again, someone who's been drinking that much, they may not notice as much of a change in their response because they have more of a tolerance when they're going through the breakup as someone who starts to use alcohol after a breakup as that numbing device. In which case that I would probably say you want to be extra, extra careful because you are going to be altering, potentially altering some of your brain chemistry. It can be a depressant, all of that. So it's not black and white, but I definitely think you have to ask yourself, most people know themselves, and you also really want to avoid potentially reaching out to an ex if what your goal is to try to go no contact. It's not ideal for that. It's also going to affect your blood sugar. I mean, it's sugar, so it is going to affect your blood sugar. It's going to affect your hormones. I mean, it can have a negative impact on pretty much every aspect of your body, especially in excess. And so I would just say that would be like a case by case for me with my client.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true because, if, you're going through this loss of the human, you don't want to also like dramatically take out anything you were depending on too. That's interesting. Now, okay, I sort of want to talk a little bit about this decade that you've been in business. Like this is amazing. I think you said in August, it'll be your 10-year. I mean, it's just crazy. So you've had a presence on Instagram. Is August 2013 when you started this Instagram account? That's amazing. So you've had a really dedicated audience pretty much this entire time. I know you said like you were going through these public elements of your life sort of to these people. Like what have the highs and lows been of being a public figure for the last decade?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, the highs have definitely been my amazing community, the people who have been there throughout and the interactions I have with them. I've always tried to respond to people as much as possible, to really think with each message, like this person is taking time out of their day to connect with me. Like that's a big deal. So that has absolutely been the best part, is building that community. And the hardest parts have been, I would say, one, I've had some pretty nasty things said about me through all different kinds of ways, some really, really ugly things. And it is hard. And, it's like the people who say these things are also the people who don't actually want to have a conversation with you. And for you to explain, no, this is not true. This is who I am, or this is what happened. And so like nobody wants someone like that. The last thing they want is for their idea of me to change, and somehow they have to like configure, their
Mhm.
perspective. So that's always a little bit frustrating, but it has also been a really beautiful thing because it has shown me who I can trust, who I can't trust, how to stand up for myself. And just like, it just doesn't matter. I mean, it really just doesn't matter. The more cruel, I mean, I've had people, I mean, but the more cruel someone is, it is so true that the more likely it is coming from their own pain point and something about you that hits at something in them that they're not happy with, because why
Mhm.
else would someone take the time to say these things? So, misinformation has probably been the hardest part. Disappointing my community has been really hard, kind of along that same line, saying like, I had what you thought was this perfect life, and actually this is not, was not the life that I ultimately wanted. And going through, several breakups like that and just saying, nope, this one didn't work out. Nope, this one didn't work out. That was really, really hard. And that's actually why after the relationship I left in 2021, and then moved to Asheville,
Mhm.
North Carolina. That was when I decided to stop sharing about my relationships publicly, and
Mm.
I've kept my personal life totally private since then. And that has been the
Wow.
best decision I made for myself. But it took a few
Wow.
times of doing that the wrong way for me to come to that conclusion. So, and then the other thing has just been, the frustrations of a changing social media world, and starting in about 2020, in the spring, like, I just, my numbers stopped growing on social media. Like, I get new people and then I lose people. I don't know if they're real people or not. I don't know who I'm losing,
Mm.
but that really stagnated. And I've reached out, or there's a community of us who started our accounts all about 8 to 10 years ago, who are some of the original like food people. And we've
Mhm.
all experienced this stall, and it's the people who started after us who've continued to grow. And yet, so that's felt a little icky. And I've also had some people say some not so nice things about that. But that has been a beautiful opportunity as well, because it has really shown me, um, one, that I can be okay without, because it's so easy to tie your identity to your growth. And
Mhm.
I've now like not really grown in a couple years, and it's not who I am. And it doesn't mean I don't have value. And my community has stayed really, really engaged. The people who are there
Mhm.
have really high engagement. So
Mhm.
that's cool. But also, it catalyzed a change in how I run my business, from needing it to be something where I make revenue based off of my numbers through brand partnerships, to shifting to more affiliate marketing, where they're not going to ask you for a bunch of information because they're not paying. They're just like, here's the affiliate code.
Yeah.
Consulting, to different ways that actually require a much smaller percentage of people to be engaged. So it's not
Mhm.
about the number. And I've actually loved that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it just makes you evaluate your revenue streams in a different way. And I think that's it's such an important topic of like this acquisition versus retention, right? Of like, if you're always focused on getting new people in, but you're not necessarily focused on like how your current audience is staying engaged to you, then like you're going to have a seesaw that, falls one way. So it's an interesting thing. And there has, obviously, I think everybody knows, like over the last few years, Instagram growth has just, come to like a pretty dramatic fall off. Like people just are not growing as fast as they were, which is fine, right? Because it is a vanity metric. And if we are looking at our engagement rates and the actual conversations that are happening with people, that carries way more weight than, the follower number. So
Mhm.
like it's interesting. It probably makes you evaluate like, okay, what revenue streams are going to be most impactful for me in my business based on the loyal relationships that I have with people, as opposed to like a follower count number.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, when at first I was sort of like feeling sorry for myself, and then I just had to be really honest. And the truth is, a lot of younger people have come onto the wellness scene. They're better photographers than me. They're better. They are. They're better photographers. They're better at making reels. They have the time and the flexibility to create content all day. I don't have that kind of time, but I also don't want to put in the amount of time that they're putting into content creation. And I
Yeah.
also had to choose whether or not I wanted to be in the basically like TikTok to Instagram rat race, because the best way to grow in the food space is to do TikTok videos that are these like kind of fun, cool, viral food hacks, which are great. I
Mm-hmm.
love to watch them myself. And it's the best way to then translate your following onto Instagram. And there are amazing content creators who are so good at coming up with these like cool, fun food hacks. So
Mm-hmm.
for me, it felt like a hamster wheel to be on that, because I felt like I was spending my whole day thinking like, what's like a cool, fun hack that no one's ever heard of? And I just didn't want to live like that.
Yeah.
For me personally, I was like, I would rather just not grow and come up with, I mean, truly, I'm thinking of two women in my life who make more money than any other women I know personally. Neither of them have Instagram followings.
Wow. Amazing.
Very, very tiny. It's not what makes money. It
Yeah.
can, but
Yep.
it doesn't have to be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such an important call out. It's just so important. Like the amount of followers you have does not impact how much money you're going to make. Like that's just like a blanket statement that everybody does need to understand, because there's so many people that glorify, well, when I get to this many followers or when I get to this, like then I'll have a successful business. And it's like, there are a lot of influencers out there that have 250,000 followers or whatever it is, and they're not converting them into like sales. So it goes so much deeper than that. And it's just something I always like to highlight.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's go through some rapid fire questions. But before we do that, where can everybody find you, learn more about you, do your recipes, all of it?
Yeah, thank you. So my website is llbalance.com, and you will see on there not only my recipes, you will also see all of my digital products, because I have multiple ebooks that can my favorite ebook is actually called my non-recipe recipes ebook, and it's really like a bunch of recipes when you just don't have like the time, energy, mental or emotional bandwidth to cook. So you can find all that, contact me and learn about my classes. And I also am taking consulting clients. I have one spot at the moment. So
Amazing. Awesome. All right. Rapid fire questions. Ready?
yeah,
Okay. What's your favorite recipe from your upcoming book?
my favorite recipe is my single serving air fryer Chick-fil-A bowl.
Oh,
Yes.
wow. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
What software can you not run your business without?
Canva.
Interesting. That's a good one. I love
Yeah,
Canva.
love it.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
The Rocky Mountains.
Is Asheville in the Rocky Mountains?
No, it's east. Asheville would be my second choice, and then the mountains are my favorite. But if I could choose, I would live in like Montana.
Okay, got it. Love it. Advice that you would give your younger self.
Um, my the advice I would give my younger self would be just to not get too attached to any one thing when it comes to my business, and to just be totally okay with the changes and not make meaning out of it.
Oh my God, that's such an important one. I hope everybody listening is internalizing that. Lastly, one lesson that you took from the pandemic that you want to keep with you.
The pandemic taught me that we are all the same freaking person. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
all going through the same struggles in so many ways. We all have the same needs, wants, desires. It was a really unifying experience in that way. Just to have so much compassion for people and realize we're all like the same.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important because there was so much divisiveness at that point. And like, I kind of feel like it's only gotten worse. And it's just like, we all like fight for things we love. And like, I think that was the biggest eye-opening thing for me was I was like, even if there's people that I feel like are being crazy, like they're doing it out of protection for the people they love. Like, that's just the ultimate thing. So like, we all have that. We all have that in common. So let's just, lean into the unity a little bit more.
Totally.
I love that. Well, Laura Lee, this has been so amazing, so eye-opening. I just so many highlights that I feel that I really hope people take. And most of that is just listen to yourself and give yourself grace and space. So thank you so much. And it was an honor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.